The rain was falling gently over the busy city, washing the dust off the tall glass buildings and painting the streets with reflections of blurred lights. People hurried along the sidewalks with umbrellas, rushing to their destinations, while cars splashed through puddles. Inside the tallest tower of the business district, Daniel Cross, the well-known CEO of a large company, was stepping out after a long day of meetings. His suit was perfectly pressed, his shoes polished, and his expression calm as always. To most people, he was a man with no weakness, disciplined, powerful, and distant. But deep inside, Daniel often felt an emptiness he could not explain. He had wealth, reputation, and a company that people admired, yet there were evenings when silence in his grand apartment felt heavier than all the responsibilities he carried. Still, as a man who had built his life on strength, he never showed such feelings. He walked out of the glass doors of his office building with the same steady steps, holding his umbrella firmly against the rain. Just as he was about to reach his waiting car, something unusual happened. A small tug at his sleeve made him stop. He looked down, surprised, and saw a little girl standing right beside him. She was perhaps 6 or 7 years old, her hair tied into 2 uneven ponytails, her small dress a little worn from use. Her shoes were wet from stepping into puddles, and her cheeks carried traces of tears that the rain had failed to wash away completely. For a brief second, Daniel thought she might be lost. He bent down slightly, his usually stern eyes softening as he asked gently, "Are you all right, little one? Where is your mother?" The girl sniffled, wiped her nose with her tiny hand, and looked up at him with the most innocent pair of eyes he had ever seen. Then, in a trembling voice, she asked something that shook him far more than he expected. "Sir, could you pretend to be my daddy? Just for one day?" Daniel froze. He was a man who had faced ruthless competitors, made decisions involving millions of dollars, and stood unshaken in the toughest negotiations. Yet those few words from a child left him speechless. He blinked, trying to make sure he had heard correctly. The girl continued quickly, as if afraid he would walk away. "Tomorrow at school, it's Father's Day. All my friends will bring their daddies. I don't have one. My teacher said it's okay, but I don't want to sit alone again. Please, just for tomorrow. You don't have to really be my daddy. Just pretend. Please." Her little voice cracked on the last word, and Daniel noticed the way her hands clutched the side of his coat, as if holding on to the last hope she had. Something stirred inside him, an unfamiliar ache that he couldn't name. He had spent years keeping his heart guarded, never letting emotions interfere with his life. But now, looking at this small child with desperate eyes, he felt as though his heart was being quietly broken and rebuilt at the same time. He cleared his throat, unsure of how to respond. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Emily," she whispered. "Emily," he repeated slowly, as though memorizing it. "Where's your mother? She must be worried about you." The girl lowered her eyes. "She's working late. She always works late. She doesn't even know I came here. I was waiting outside for a long time, hoping someone would help me. Then I saw you. You looked kind. You looked like someone who could be my daddy." Daniel's chest tightened at those words. People often looked at him and saw power, wealth, and authority. But to this little girl, none of that mattered. She had seen something else in him, something he wasn't sure even existed. The chauffeur waiting by the car glanced curiously at the scene, but Daniel raised his hand slightly, signaling him to wait. His mind was racing. Was this really happening? Could a stranger, a busy man with no family of his own, step into the role of a father, even if only for a day? The rain grew heavier, and Daniel noticed that Emily's small shoulders were shivering. Without thinking too much, he opened his umbrella wider and pulled her gently under its cover. "You'll get sick standing like this," he said. Emily looked up at him, her eyes wide, as though amazed that he had cared enough to shield her from the rain. That simple gesture seemed to mean more to her than all the grand promises anyone else could have made. Daniel's heart was in conflict. A part of him wanted to walk away, to remind himself that he was not this child's father, that this was not his responsibility. But another part, a quieter, more human part, told him he couldn't ignore her plea. Something about Emily's innocence and courage in asking a stranger for love touched a hidden corner of his soul, a place he had long forgotten existed. He crouched down to her level, meeting her eyes directly. "Emily," he said slowly, "pretending to be your daddy is not a small thing. It's very important to you, isn't it?" She nodded eagerly, her little ponytails bouncing. "Yes. It's the most important thing. Just for one day. Please. I don't want to be the only one without a daddy. Everyone will laugh at me again." Again. That word echoed in Daniel's mind. He pictured her sitting alone while other children laughed with their fathers. He could almost feel the loneliness she must have carried, a loneliness he himself had once known as a child. Though he had never spoken about it, Daniel too had grown up without a father. Perhaps that was why her words cut so deep into him now. He took a deep breath. "All right," he said finally, his voice firm yet kind. "If it means that much to you, I will come tomorrow. I'll pretend to be your daddy for the day." For a moment, Emily stared at him as if she couldn't believe what she had heard. Then her face lit up with a smile so bright that even the rainy evening seemed to glow with warmth. She clapped her hands and whispered, "Thank you, thank you, thank you," before throwing her little arms around his neck. Daniel stiffened at first. He wasn't used to such sudden affection. But then, slowly, he placed his hand on her back, feeling how small and fragile she was. A strange sense of peace washed over him, something he hadn't felt in years. As he helped Emily find her way back home safely that evening, Daniel couldn't shake off the thought of what had just happened. A stranger's child had chosen him, of all people, to play the role of a father. And for reasons he didn't fully understand, he had agreed. That night, as he sat in his quiet apartment, the sound of Emily's hopeful voice echoed in his mind. "Sir, could you pretend to be my daddy, just for one day?" He realized it wasn't just a request from a child, it was also a challenge to his heart, a test of whether he could open himself to something more meaningful than wealth and success. And though he told himself it would only be for a single day, deep inside, he already sensed that this small encounter had the power to change his life forever. The next morning, Daniel woke earlier than usual. Normally, his mornings began with reports, emails, and a quiet breakfast prepared by his staff. But today, there was a strange excitement in his chest, mixed with nervousness. He had agreed to something unusual, something completely out of his routine. A little girl had asked him to be her father for a day, and for some reason he had said yes. He dressed more simply than usual, leaving behind his formal suits. He chose a plain shirt and comfortable trousers, something that wouldn't make him stand out too much at a school filled with parents. As he looked at himself in the mirror, he almost smiled. He had never imagined himself preparing for a school event like this. When the time came, Daniel asked his driver to take him to the small neighborhood where Emily lived. The car rolled through quieter streets now, far away from the tall towers and shining glass walls he was used to. Here, the buildings were older, paint peeling from the walls, small shops opening one by one, and children running with school bags on their backs. It was a world Daniel hadn't visited in years, yet it felt alive in a way that the business district never did. As the car stopped near a modest apartment building, Daniel saw Emily waiting near the gate. She wore a simple pink dress, freshly ironed though a little faded, and her hair was tied neatly with ribbons. She clutched a small lunchbox in her hands and looked around nervously until her eyes fell on the familiar black car. When she saw Daniel step out, her face lit up with pure joy. She ran to him, her small shoes tapping quickly against the pavement. "You came," she exclaimed, almost jumping with happiness. Daniel found himself smiling, something he didn't often do. "Of course I came. I promised, didn't I? Emily nodded eagerly and held out her little hand. For a moment, Daniel hesitated. He wasn't used to holding anyone's hand, not since he was a child. But when Emily looked up at him with trust shining in her eyes, he gently took her hand into his. Her fingers were tiny, yet they gripped his strongly, as if afraid he might disappear. As they walked toward the school, Daniel asked softly, "Emily, can I ask you something?" "Yes," she said, swinging her lunchbox a little. "Why did you come to me yesterday? There were so many people on the street." "Why me?" Emily looked thoughtful, then answered in her small, serious voice. "Because you looked lonely." Daniel stopped for a moment, taken aback. "Lonely?" he repeated. She nodded. "Yes. My teacher says sometimes people have everything but still look lonely. When you came out of that big building, everyone looked at you like you were important. But your eyes looked like mine when I sit alone at lunch. That's why I asked you. Because I thought maybe you'd understand." Her words struck him like a gentle blow. He had spent his entire life hiding his feelings behind a wall of confidence, yet somehow a child had seen right through him in a single glance. He didn't know what to say, so he only squeezed her hand gently and kept walking. When they reached the school, the playground was already filled with children and their fathers. Some men were tall, others round, some laughing loudly, others busy taking pictures of their kids. Emily's steps slowed a little as she saw the crowd, and Daniel felt her grip tighten on his hand. "Don't worry," he whispered. "I'm here." Her smile returned, and together they walked through the gates. Inside, the teacher greeted them warmly, though her eyes showed a flicker of surprise at seeing Daniel. Most parents were from ordinary jobs: drivers, shopkeepers, clerks. Daniel's presence, even in simple clothes, carried an aura of someone important. But the teacher quickly turned her attention to Emily, patting her shoulder. "Emily, I'm glad you came. And this must be your father." Emily looked up at Daniel with excitement. He gave the smallest nod, and she answered proudly, "Yes. This is my daddy." Something shifted in Daniel's chest at those words. He wasn't really her father, but for that moment, he felt the weight and warmth of the title. The activities began. The children sat with their fathers, making small art projects together. Emily eagerly guided Daniel, showing him how to cut papers into shapes and paste them into a colorful card. Her laughter rang through the room when Daniel clumsily glued his fingers together, and for the first time in years, Daniel found himself laughing too, genuine laughter that came from the heart, not from politeness. Later, there was a small race in the playground where children had to run holding their fathers' hands. Daniel hadn't run in years, but when Emily pulled him along, he found himself running with her, their steps almost in sync. They didn't win, but Emily didn't care. She was too busy laughing, her cheeks flushed with joy. During lunch, Daniel noticed Emily sharing her food with him, offering the best piece of her sandwich. "Mama made it last night," she said proudly. "She always makes sure I have something nice." It was in those small moments that Daniel began to piece together the picture of Emily's life. A hard-working mother, a missing father, a child who only wanted to feel normal in front of her friends. And yet, despite everything, Emily's heart was full of hope. As the day went on, Daniel felt something inside him changing. The walls he had built for years were slowly softening. He watched Emily laughing, introducing him to her classmates, holding his hand as though it was the most natural thing in the world. And in those moments, he realized just how much she had been missing and how deeply she valued something as simple as a father's presence. When the event finally ended, Emily's eyes were shining with happiness. "Did you see, Daddy?" she asked excitedly as they walked out of the school. "Nobody laughed at me today. Nobody asked me where my daddy was. Because you were there." Daniel felt his throat tighten. He had done many things in life: built companies, made fortunes, stood in front of crowds, but never had he given someone such simple happiness. "Emily," he said gently, "I'm glad I could be there for you today." She skipped a little, still holding his hand. Even if it was just pretend, it was the best day ever. But as he looked down at her, Daniel knew it hadn't been pretend at all. At least not for him. Something real had begun in his heart, something he couldn't easily ignore. That night, after returning to his quiet apartment, he couldn't stop thinking about Emily. Her words, her smile, her courage, they kept replaying in his mind. He poured himself a glass of water and stood by the window, staring at the city lights, wondering why he felt so different. For years, he had convinced himself that family wasn't for him, that he was destined to walk life alone. But now, a little girl with ponytails and bright eyes had made him question everything. And though he told himself it was only for one day, deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning of something much greater. The next morning, Daniel felt a strange kind of nervousness that he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't the nervousness of facing investors or giving a speech at a business conference. This was different. Today he wasn't walking into a boardroom filled with polished suits and sharp words. Today he was walking into a classroom filled with crayons, children, and laughter. He arrived at Emily's school just a little early. The sun was shining brightly, drying the streets after the rain from the day before. The schoolyard was already buzzing with activity. Children ran around, their voices filling the air like little birds, while fathers stood nearby, chatting with one another. When Emily spotted Daniel at the gate, her face lit up like the sun itself. She ran toward him, her pink dress swaying as she called, "Daddy! Daddy!" The word rang out so naturally from her lips that Daniel's heart gave a small jolt. He reminded himself silently that it was only pretend, but the warmth that spread in his chest refused to be ignored. Emily grabbed his hand with excitement. "Come on, Daddy, I'll show you everything. Today is going to be the best day ever." Daniel allowed her to lead him, his tall figure towering among the crowd of fathers. He could feel the curious glances of a few parents who seemed to recognize him as the CEO of a large company. But today, he wasn't Daniel Cross, the businessman. He was simply Emily's daddy. The first activity began inside the classroom. The children and their fathers were asked to create a Father's Day card together. The desks were covered with colored papers, scissors, markers, and glue. Daniel sat beside Emily, watching her excitement as she explained what they had to do. "You cut the paper like this," she said, demonstrating with her tiny hands. "Then you stick it here. Don't mess it up, Daddy." Daniel chuckled softly. "I'll try my best, but I'm not very good with glue." True to his words, within minutes he managed to get his fingers stuck together with glue. Emily burst into laughter, the kind of laughter that bubbled up freely and made everyone else smile. Daniel laughed too, shaking his head. "Maybe I'm better at signing contracts than cutting papers," he admitted. Emily leaned close and whispered proudly, "It's okay. You're still the best daddy." That simple sentence made Daniel's heart swell in a way no compliment about his business ever had. After the crafts, it was time for storytelling. The teacher asked each father to sit with their child and share a short story from their own life. Daniel hesitated for a moment. He had never spoken about his childhood to anyone, let alone to a classroom full of children. But when Emily looked up at him with expectant eyes, he found the courage to speak. "When I was a little boy," Daniel began slowly, "I loved kites. But my mother couldn't afford to buy me one. So I made my own, using sticks and paper. It didn't fly very high, but I kept trying every day. And one day, it soared into the sky. I was so happy I laughed until my stomach hurt." The children clapped, and Emily clapped the loudest. "See? My daddy knows how to make kites," she said proudly, as if he had just told the greatest story in the world. Daniel looked at her and smiled. That story, which had always reminded him of his own struggles, now felt like a treasure because it made Emily happy. Later, everyone went outside for the father-child games. The first game was a sack race where the fathers had to carry their children on their backs and hop to the finish line. Daniel had never done anything so silly in his entire life. But when Emily climbed onto his back, giggling with delight, he forgot his hesitation. "Hold on tight," he told her, and with a determined face, he began hopping forward. The sight of the powerful CEO of a large company struggling to hop in a potato sack made even the teachers laugh. Daniel's expensive shoes got covered in dust, and he almost fell twice, but Emily's laughter gave him strength. They didn't win the race, but when they crossed the finish line together, Emily clapped her hands and shouted, "We did it, Daddy! We're the best team!" The other fathers smiled at Daniel, some patting him on the back. For once, he wasn't being admired for his wealth or success. He was being recognized as a father figure, something he had never experienced before. The next game was even more amusing. The children had to draw a picture of their father, and the fathers had to guess what the picture was. Emily drew a tall man with glasses, holding an umbrella, with a small girl holding his hand. Daniel's throat tightened when he saw it. "That's me and you," he said softly. Emily nodded with pride. "Yes. That's my daddy. You." Those words sank deep into Daniel's heart. Even though he knew it was pretend, he couldn't deny how real it felt in that moment. After the games, everyone gathered for lunch. Daniel sat with Emily under a shady tree in the schoolyard. She opened her small lunchbox and offered him half of her sandwich. "Mama made it with love," she said with a smile. Daniel accepted it carefully, touched by her simple gesture. The sandwich tasted ordinary, but somehow it was the most meaningful meal he had eaten in years. As they ate, Emily told him stories about her classmates, about her teacher, and about the little things in her life. She spoke with so much excitement that Daniel found himself listening as if every word was precious. Hours passed quickly, and soon the event was coming to an end. The teacher gathered the children and fathers for one final activity. Each child had to say something about their father in front of everyone. Daniel felt a sudden nervousness as Emily's turn came. She walked to the front of the class, holding her card. Her small voice filled the room as she said, "My daddy is the best daddy. He came for me today when I needed him the most. He makes me laugh, and he holds my hand, and he doesn't let me feel lonely. I love him very much." Daniel's eyes stung, though he quickly blinked to hide it. Those words spoken by a child who wasn't even his touched him deeper than any award or recognition he had ever received. When Emily ran back to him and hugged his waist tightly, Daniel placed a hand on her head. "You were amazing," he whispered. On their way back home, Emily skipped happily beside him, her small hand still in his. "Did you see, Daddy? Nobody laughed at me today. Everyone saw I have a daddy now. I was so happy." Daniel looked down at her bright face. He wanted to remind her that it was only pretend, that tomorrow he would go back to his own world. But he couldn't bring himself to say it. Not when she was so full of joy. As he left her at the gate of her apartment, Emily gave him a tight hug. "Thank you for today. It was the best day of my life." Daniel stood there for a long moment, watching her disappear inside. His heart felt heavy yet strangely warm. He had only meant to fulfill a small request, but instead, he had discovered something he never knew he was missing. That night, lying in bed, Daniel replayed the day in his mind. The laughter, the small hand in his, the proud way Emily had called him daddy. He realized with a quiet shock that it hadn't felt like pretending at all. It had felt real. And though he told himself again that it was only for one day, deep inside, he already knew this bond wasn't going to fade so easily. The following days felt strangely different for Daniel. His routine had not changed: meetings, contracts, decisions, the endless hum of business. Yet something had quietly shifted inside him. No matter how busy the day became, his thoughts wandered back to Emily's laughter, the way she had proudly introduced him as her daddy, and the warm little hand that had held onto his so tightly. He tried to convince himself it was only a single event, a kind act he had done for a child in need. But the memory wouldn't leave him. At night, when the city lights sparkled outside his apartment, he found himself replaying Emily's words in his mind, "Nobody laughed at me today. Everyone saw I have a daddy now." One evening, after finishing his work earlier than usual, Daniel asked his driver to take him to the neighborhood where Emily lived. He told himself he just wanted to make sure she was all right. When he arrived, the apartment building looked modest, its paint a little faded, but warm lights shone from many of the windows. Children were playing on the steps, their laughter echoing through the narrow street. Daniel spotted Emily near the entrance, skipping rope by herself. When she noticed him, her face lit up like the sunrise. "Daddy," she cried out, dropping her rope and running toward him. Daniel bent down slightly as she threw her arms around his waist. "Emily," he said softly, unable to hide his smile, "I thought I'd come to see how you're doing." "I'm good. Mama's cooking dinner. Do you want to come inside?" she asked eagerly, her eyes shining with hope. Daniel hesitated. He wasn't sure if it was proper to suddenly appear at a stranger's home. But Emily's pleading eyes made it difficult to refuse. "If your mother doesn't mind," he answered gently. Emily grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the stairs. The apartment was small, and when they stepped inside, the warm aroma of simple home-cooked food filled the air. A woman stood near the stove, her hair tied back, her face tired yet graceful. She turned, surprised to see a tall man following her daughter. "Emily," she said firmly, "who is this?" Before Daniel could explain, Emily answered quickly, "Mama, this is my daddy. The one I told you about. He came today." The woman's eyes widened in confusion. Daniel raised his hand politely. "I'm sorry for the sudden visit. I'm not really her father. She asked me to attend the school event with her, and I agreed. I didn't want her to feel left out." The mother's expression softened as understanding dawned. She placed the spoon down and wiped her hands on her apron. "I see. Thank you. I heard from Emily that she had a wonderful day at school. I wasn't sure if it was real or just her imagination. But now I know." Daniel nodded respectfully. "She's a remarkable child. She reminded me of something I had forgotten, what it means to truly matter to someone." The woman's eyes grew gentle. "I'm Clara," she introduced herself. "Life has not been easy for us, but Emily is my strength. I work long hours, so sometimes she feels lonely. That's why the school events are difficult for her." Daniel glanced at Emily, who was now busy setting the table proudly as if preparing for an honored guest. His heart ached a little at Clara's words. He understood the struggle hidden behind them, the sacrifices, the exhaustion, the endless effort of raising a child alone. Clara noticed his thoughtful expression. "You're welcome to stay for dinner. It's just a simple meal." Daniel almost declined out of habit. He was used to fine restaurants and carefully prepared dishes. But something about the cozy smell of food, the small apartment filled with warmth, made him stay. "I'd be honored," he replied. The three of them sat together at the table. The food was plain rice, vegetables, and soup, but it tasted richer than anything Daniel had eaten in weeks. Emily chattered happily, telling her mother about the sack race, the card they made, and how Daddy had told the kite story. Clara listened quietly, her eyes softening as she saw her daughter's joy. For the first time in years, Daniel felt like he was part of something real. Not a business dinner, not a formal event, but a family meal where laughter and simple conversations filled the space. After dinner, Emily brought out her school drawings to show Daniel. She proudly displayed the picture of him holding her hand with the umbrella. "See? It's you and me," she said. Daniel looked at it carefully and smiled. "It's beautiful. I'll keep it in my office, so I never forget." Clara, watching from the side, felt a strange mixture of gratitude and caution. She had seen how easily her daughter had attached herself to this man. She didn't want Emily's fragile heart to be hurt again. After Emily had gone to bed, Clara spoke softly to Daniel as they stood by the door. "I appreciate what you did for her. But she has already lost one parent. I don't want her to be disappointed again." Daniel met her gaze seriously. "I understand. I didn't plan for this, but your daughter touched my heart. I don't make promises lightly, but I can't walk away either. At least not yet." Clara studied him for a moment, then nodded slightly. "Just don't give her hopes you can't keep." Daniel left the apartment with those words echoing in his mind. He knew Clara was right. He had to be careful. But as he walked back to his car, he realized that Emily had already carved a place in his heart. In the days that followed, Daniel began visiting more often. Sometimes he brought small gifts, coloring books, storybooks, or a box of crayons. Other times, he simply came to listen to Emily talk about her day. She would sit beside him, chattering about her friends, her lessons, and the little dreams she carried. Daniel, who had spent years surrounded by silence, found himself looking forward to those moments. One evening, he surprised both Emily and Clara by helping with Emily's homework. Though his world had always been numbers and business, he found joy in explaining simple math problems to her. When she finally solved a question correctly, she threw her arms around his neck and said, "You're the best daddy ever." Daniel felt something deep inside him stir again, an emotion he couldn't name, but it felt like belonging. Slowly, Clara too began to soften toward him. She saw how patient he was with Emily, how he listened to her stories with genuine interest, how he never acted as though he was too busy or too important. Though she remained cautious, she couldn't deny that his presence brought happiness to her daughter's life. One Saturday, Daniel took both Clara and Emily to a park. It was a simple outing, no luxury cars, no expensive restaurants, just a picnic under the shade of trees. Emily ran around chasing butterflies while Daniel and Clara sat on a bench, watching her. "She looks so happy," Daniel said quietly. Clara nodded. "She hasn't laughed like this in a long time." Daniel glanced at Clara. "You've done an amazing job raising her. She's strong and kind because of you." Clara looked at him with surprise. She wasn't used to hearing such words. For a moment, their eyes held, and something unspoken passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of shared respect and perhaps the beginning of trust. As the sun set, Emily returned to them, holding a small wild flower. She gave it to Daniel with a smile. "For you, Daddy. Because you're part of our family now." Daniel took the flower gently, his throat tightening. He realized then that what had started as a pretend role was slowly becoming something real. He hadn't planned for this, but he couldn't deny it. Emily had given him a place in her heart, and without realizing it, he had given her a place in his. That night, as Daniel drove back home, he looked at the flower resting on the seat beside him. He knew his life was changing in ways he had never expected. For years, his world had been about success and wealth. But now, a little girl and her mother were teaching him the meaning of love, warmth, and family. And though he didn't yet know where this path would lead, he knew one thing for certain: he no longer wanted to walk it alone. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks slowly began to weave into months. Daniel's life, once ruled only by board meetings and business reports, had taken on a new rhythm. He still carried the weight of being a CEO, but now there was something more waiting for him beyond his office. There was Emily's laughter, Clara's quiet strength, and the warmth of a small home where love could be felt even in the simplest things. At first, he told himself it was only temporary, that he was just helping a lonely child smile again. But with every visit, with every story Emily told him, with every meal Clara shared, Daniel found himself more deeply tied to them. Emily began to wait at the window every evening, hoping to spot his car. The moment she saw him, she would run down the steps with joy that lit up the whole street. "Daddy's here," she would shout, and the sound of those words filled Daniel's heart in ways he could never explain. Clara, too, noticed the change in her daughter. Emily had become more confident at school, more cheerful at home. She no longer avoided group activities, no longer sat alone during events. The simple presence of someone she could proudly call Daddy gave her the strength she had been missing. And though Clara still worried about the future, she couldn't deny that Daniel had brought a happiness into their lives she hadn't seen in years. One Sunday afternoon, Daniel invited both of them to his apartment for the first time. Emily's eyes widened as she entered the spacious rooms filled with elegant furniture and large windows. But instead of being impressed by the luxury, she simply asked, "Daddy, why is it so quiet here?" Daniel paused. He had never noticed it before, but now her words rang true. His apartment, though beautiful, had always felt empty. The silence echoed in every corner. But as Emily ran around, her laughter filling the rooms, the place suddenly felt alive. Clara stood quietly near the window, watching her daughter with a soft smile. Daniel turned to her and admitted, "It's only quiet because I was alone." "She's the first to bring life into this space." Clara looked at him then, her eyes meeting his, and for the first time, Daniel felt that she no longer saw him only as a stranger. Their bond grew stronger with every passing day. Sometimes Daniel would help Emily with her homework, sometimes he would take them out for walks in the park or ice cream on weekends. He discovered small joys he had never known: the way Emily would fall asleep on his shoulder during a car ride, the way Clara's laughter sounded when Emily told silly jokes, the way a simple family dinner could warm his heart more than any expensive restaurant. But along with happiness came a quiet fear in Daniel's heart. He wondered if he truly had the right to step into their lives. He was a man used to control, yet when it came to Emily and Clara, he found himself uncertain. Could he be the father Emily deserved? Could he be the companion Clara could rely on? One evening, as he walked Emily back from school, she suddenly asked, "Daddy, are you going to leave one day? Like the other daddy did?" The question struck Daniel deeply. He stopped walking and knelt in front of her. "Emily," he said gently, "I can't change what happened before. But I want you to know something. If I'm here, it's because I want to be. And I don't plan on leaving." Her little face studied him for a moment, as if searching for truth in his words. Then she nodded slowly and hugged him. "Good. Because I don't ever want you to go." That night, Daniel realized he had made his choice. He no longer wanted to think of this as pretend. He no longer wanted to keep a distance, convincing himself it was only kindness. He wanted to be there for Emily, for Clara, for real. A few days later, he spoke to Clara honestly. They were sitting at the small kitchen table after Emily had gone to bed. "Clara," he began, "I know this started as something simple. I know you were worried I might hurt her feelings. But I can't walk away anymore. I care for Emily. And I care for you too." Clara looked down at her hands, silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "Daniel, I've spent years protecting Emily from disappointment. I never wanted her to expect something I couldn't give. But I can see it now, she needs you. And truthfully, I think I do too." Daniel reached across the table, gently taking her hand. For a man who had conquered the business world, this was the most important decision he had ever made. From that day forward, things slowly changed. Daniel didn't just visit anymore, he became part of their lives. He joined school events, helped with chores, shared meals, and filled the spaces that had once been empty. Emily proudly introduced him everywhere as her daddy, and Clara, though still cautious at times, began to lean on him more openly. Months passed, and the bond only deepened. One evening, as they sat together in the park watching Emily play, Clara turned to Daniel and said quietly, "Do you realize what you've given us? You turned a little girl's dream into reality. You gave her the father's love she always wished for. And you gave me hope I thought I had lost." Daniel looked at her, then at Emily chasing butterflies with joy, and he answered softly, "You gave me something too. You gave me a family." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of his entire heart. Time has a way of proving what is real. And as the seasons changed, it became clear to all three of them that what began as a child's desperate request was no longer pretend. It was life. It was love. It was family. On Emily's next birthday, Daniel surprised her with a small kite. "For us to fly together," he said with a smile. She squealed with joy, remembering the story he had once told her about his childhood. Together, with Clara watching, they ran across the park, the kite soaring high above them. Emily's laughter filled the air, bright and free. And in that moment, Daniel knew his life had truly changed. The emptiness was gone. The silence had been replaced by laughter, the loneliness by love. What began as a single question, "Sir, could you pretend to be my daddy, just for one day?" had become the start of a forever bond. And for Daniel, Emily, and Clara, it was the beginning of a new life, one where no one had to pretend anymore.